The morning sun peeked through the tall windows of a bustling television studio in Los Angeles. The air buzzed with excitement as staff members scurried around, making last-minute adjustments to cameras and microphones. The audience, a sea of eager faces, chattered animatedly, their anticipation growing with each passing minute. Today was no ordinary day. Keanu Reeves, the actor known for his quiet charm and down-to-earth demeanor, was about to sit down for a live interview that had been hyped for weeks. Rumors swirled like wildfire about what he might reveal during this appearance, but no one, absolutely no one, could have guessed the bombshell he was about to drop. Keanu walked onto the stage, his presence instantly calming yet electric. Dressed in his signature understated style, a sleek black leather jacket paired with dark jeans, he looked every bit the relatable star fans adored. His hair was slightly tousled as if he'd just stepped out of a casual afternoon breeze, and his warm smile radiated sincerity. As he took his seat across from the talk show host, the applause from the audience thundered through the room. Keanu nodded politely, acknowledging the cheers with a humble wave. He seemed unfazed by the attention, carrying himself with the same quiet confidence that had endeared him to millions around the world. The host, a charismatic figure known for her ability to draw out even the most guarded of guests, greeted Keanu warmly. "We're so thrilled to have you here today," she said, leaning forward with genuine enthusiasm. "You've been teasing this big announcement for weeks now, and I think everyone is dying to know. What's going on?" Keanu chuckled, softly, his deep voice resonating through the microphone. "Well, it's definitely something I've been thinking about for a long time," he replied, his tone measured but tinged with intrigue. "And yeah, it's a story I feel people need to hear." The audience leaned forward collectively, hanging on his every word. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every flicker of emotion on Keanu's face. There was a brief pause, a moment where the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Then Keanu began to speak, his words painting a vivid picture of recent events that had taken him far beyond the glitz and glamour of Hollywood. "I've always believed in exploring life outside of the bubble we often find ourselves in," Keanu started, his voice steady and reflective. "Acting has given me incredible opportunities, but it's also made me realize how much there is to learn beyond scripts and sets. Over the past year, I've traveled to places most people don't get to see, the remote corners of the world, where life moves at a different pace. These trips weren't about filming or promoting anything. They were about understanding humanity in its rawest form." As he spoke, images flashed on a large screen behind him. Pictures of Keanu walking through dusty village streets, sitting cross-legged on woven mats with local elders, and sharing meals with families who welcomed him into their homes. Each photo told a story of connection and curiosity, showcasing a side of the actor few had ever seen before. The audience watched, captivated as Keanu described these encounters in detail. "In one village," he continued, his eyes lighting up with memory, "I met a woman who had lost everything in a flood. Her home, her crops, everything. Yet, when I asked her how she kept going, she smiled and said, 'Life gives us storms, but it also gives us rainbows.' That kind of resilience, it stays with you. It makes you rethink your own struggles and blessings." His words struck a chord with the audience, many of whom nodded in agreement or wiped away tears. But Keanu wasn't done. He went on to describe meetings with spiritual leaders from different faiths, conversations that delved into questions about purpose, doubt, and the meaning of life. He spoke of late-night talks under starlit skies, where ideas flowed freely and barriers dissolved. It was clear that these experiences had left a profound mark on him, shaping not just his perspective, but also the reason he was sitting there that day. "But there's one meeting that stands out above all others," Keanu said, his tone shifting slightly. The playful spark in his eyes dimmed, replaced by something deeper, something serious. The room grew quieter, the kind of silence that precedes a storm. It happened at the Vatican during a private audience with Pope Francis. At the mention of the Pope, murmurs rippled through the crowd. Everyone knew Pope Francis as a global figure of compassion and reform, a man who had consistently pushed for change within the Catholic Church and beyond. But why would Keanu be meeting with him? And what could possibly connect an actor from Hollywood to the leader of one of the world's largest religions? Cano paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the audience. He glanced briefly at the host, who sat wide-eyed, clearly as shocked as everyone else. Then, taking a deep breath, he continued, "When I first received the invitation, I didn't know what to expect. I thought maybe it would be a formal exchange, a polite conversation about charity work or cultural projects. But what actually happened, well, let's just say it changed my life." He leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees, as if preparing to share a secret too heavy to keep inside any longer. "Pope Francis isn't just a religious leader," Keanu said, his voice soft but filled with conviction. "He's a human being, one who carries immense responsibility but also immense vulnerability. During our meeting, he opened up to me in ways I never imagined possible. He shared things, personal things, that shook me to my core. By now, the tension in the room was palpable. People shifted in their seats, some clutching their phones tightly, ready to record whatever came next. Others simply stared, their mouths slightly agape, unable to process what they were hearing. Was Keanu really about to reveal something deeply personal about the Pope? And if so, why? I promised myself I wouldn't say anything unless I felt it was right, Keanu admitted, his gaze sweeping across the audience. But after much thought, I realized this isn't just my story to tell. It's a story that belongs to everyone who's ever doubted themselves, questioned their path, or wondered if they're enough. Because if someone like Pope Francis can wrestle with those feelings, then maybe the rest of us aren't alone in our struggles either. With that, Keanu fell silent, allowing his words to hang in the air like a question waiting to be answered. The host, visibly stunned, hesitated for a moment before finding her voice. "Keanu," she said slowly, "you're saying that Pope Francis confided in you about personal doubts? About his role as a leader?" Keanu nodded, his expression solemn. "Yes," he replied simply. "And it's not just about him, it's about all of us. That's why I'm here today. To share this story, not for shock value, but because I believe it has the power to unite us." The audience erupted into murmurs again, a mix of disbelief, awe, and curiosity filling the room. Little did they know, this was only the beginning of a revelation that would challenge everything they thought they knew, not just about Pope Francis, but about themselves. The studio lights seemed to dim slightly, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Keanu's words hung in the air, heavy with meaning, and the audience sat frozen, unsure of what would come next. The talk show host, visibly trying to process the magnitude of what she had just heard, leaned forward again, her voice trembling with a mix of curiosity and disbelief. "Keanu," she began, her tone softer now, almost reverent. "Can you tell us more? What exactly did Pope Francis share with you?" Keanu took a deep breath, his fingers brushing against the edge of the chair as if grounding himself. He looked down for a moment, collecting his thoughts before raising his eyes to meet the camera. His expression was calm but intense, like someone carrying a truth too important to be rushed. "It wasn't just one thing," he said finally, his voice steady yet tinged with emotion. "It was a series of moments, a conversation that unfolded over hours. We started talking about faith, about leadership, about the challenges facing the world today. But then, somewhere along the way, the conversation shifted. It became personal." He paused again, choosing his words carefully. "Pope Francis told me something I'll never forget. He said, being a leader doesn't mean you stop being human." At first, I thought it was just a profound statement, the kind of wisdom you'd expect from someone in his position. But as he continued, I realized he wasn't just speaking philosophically. He was sharing his own struggles, his fears, his doubts, his insecurities. The audience listened intently, their faces a mix of shock and fascination. Some people exchanged glances while others scribbled notes or whispered to their neighbors. No one moved to leave, no one even shifted in their seats. It was as if Keanu had cast a spell over the room, drawing them into a story that felt both intimate and monumental. He admitted to me that there are days when he wakes up and wonders if he's truly worthy of leading millions of believers. Keanu continued, his voice dropping slightly as if sharing a secret meant only for those who truly understood. He said he often feels the weight of expectations pressing down on him, not just from the church, but from the entire world. People look to him for guidance, for strength, for answers, and sometimes he feels like he doesn't have those answers. Sometimes he feels lost. The room fell silent again, the kind of silence that comes when people are confronted with something they didn't expect to hear. For years, Pope Francis had been seen as a beacon of hope, a man who radiated compassion and humility. To imagine him grappling with self-doubt seemed almost impossible. Yet here was Keanu Reeves, sitting in front of them, saying that the Pope himself had confessed to feeling unworthy of his role. He told me he prays every day for clarity, Keanu added, his tone filled with admiration. But even prayer doesn't always bring peace. He said there are nights when he lies awake wondering if he's doing enough, if he's making the right decisions. He worries about the future, not just for the church, but for humanity as a whole. He sees the divisions, the wars, the environmental crises, and he feels the burden of it all. As Keanu spoke, images of Pope Francis appeared on the screen behind him. Photos of the pontiff embracing refugees, visiting prisons, and kneeling to wash the feet of the poor. These were moments that had defined his papacy, showcasing a man who seemed fearless in the face of adversity. Yet Keanu's words painted a different picture, one of vulnerability and humility. It was jarring yet strangely comforting to realize that even someone as revered as the Pope could feel uncertain. What struck me most, Keanu said, his voice growing softer, was how honest he was about his emotions. He didn't try to hide behind his title or pretend he had all the answers. Instead, he opened up about his fears in a way that made me see him not as a distant figure, but as a person, a human being trying to navigate life just like the rest of us. The audience erupted into murmurs once again, this time with a sense of awe rather than skepticism. Many people nodded, some wiping away tears as if Keanu's words had touched a part of them they hadn't realized needed healing. The host, regaining her composure, asked the question everyone was thinking. Why do you think he shared this with you, Keanu? Why open up to an actor of all people? Keanu smiled faintly, as if he had anticipated the question. I don't think it's about me being an actor, he replied. I think it's about trust. When we met, there was no agenda, no cameras, no reporters. It was just two people having a conversation. Maybe he saw something in me, a willingness to listen without judgment, or maybe he simply needed to talk to someone outside his usual circle. Whatever the reason, I'm grateful he trusted me enough to share his thoughts. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. And honestly, he added, I think he wanted people to know that it's okay to feel doubt. It's okay to feel unworthy. Those feelings don't make you weak. They make you human. If someone like Pope Francis can admit to struggling, then maybe the rest of us can give ourselves permission to be imperfect too. The audience erupted into applause, their cheers echoing through the studio. For many, Keanu's revelation was more than just a shocking story. It was a reminder that no one is immune to the trials of life. Whether you're a global leader or an ordinary person, everyone faces moments of uncertainty and fear. And in that shared humanity, there was a strange kind of comfort. But as the applause died down, a new wave of questions began to form. What would this revelation mean for the Catholic Church? How would devout followers react to hearing their spiritual leader speak so candidly about his struggles? And perhaps most importantly, why had Keanu chosen to share this story now? Keanu seemed to sense the unspoken queries swirling in the room. He leaned back slightly, his posture relaxed but his eyes still sharp with purpose. I didn't take this lightly, he said, addressing the lingering concerns. I spent weeks debating whether or not to say anything, but in the end I realized that keeping this to myself would be doing a disservice to Pope Francis, to the message he's trying to spread, and to everyone who might benefit from hearing it. His gaze swept across the audience, connecting, with individuals scattered throughout the room. This isn't about creating controversy or stirring up drama, he emphasized. It's about reminding people that we're all in this together. We all struggle, we all doubt, and we all yearn for connection. If sharing this story helps even one person feel less alone, then it's worth it. The sincerity in his voice was undeniable, and the audience responded with another round of applause, this time tinged with gratitude. For all the fame and success Keanu had achieved, he remained grounded, using his platform not for self-promotion, but for something far greater. In that moment, he wasn't just an actor, he was a bridge between worlds, bringing people closer through the power of storytelling. As the interview continued, the host steered the conversation toward the broader implications of Keanu's revelation. "Do you think this will change how people view Pope Francis?" she asked, her tone probing but respectful. "Or even how they view faith and leadership in general?" Keanu considered the question for a moment, his brow furrowing slightly as he thought. "I think it depends on the person," he answered, finally. "Some might see his honesty as a sign of weakness, while others will see it as a sign of strength. Personally, I believe it takes immense courage to admit your vulnerabilities, especially when you're in a position of power. It shows that true leadership isn't about being perfect. It's about being authentic." He paused, letting the idea settle before continuing. "As for faith, I think this story reminds us that spirituality isn't about having all the answers. It's about asking the right questions and being brave enough to face whatever comes next." The audience absorbed his words, many nodding in agreement. By now, the initial shock of Keanu's announcement had given way to reflection. People weren't just listening anymore, they were thinking, feeling, and connecting. The ripple effects of his story were already beginning to spread, touching hearts and minds in ways he couldn't have predicted. Little did anyone know, this was only the beginning. The moment Keanu finished speaking, the studio erupted into a mixture of applause, murmurs, and gasps. People clapped not because they were entertained, but because they felt moved, deeply and unexpectedly. For many in the audience, Keanu's words had struck a chord that resonated far beyond the walls of the television studio. It wasn't just about Pope Francis anymore. It was about the shared human experience, the universal struggle to find meaning and purpose in an often chaotic world. As the host thanked Keanu for his openness, she couldn't help but ask one final question before wrapping up the segment. "Do you think this revelation will change how people see the Catholic Church as an institution?" Her voice carried a hint of caution, as if she feared treading into sensitive territory. Keanu leaned forward again, his expression thoughtful. "I don't know," he admitted honestly. "But I do think it might change how people see faith itself. The Catholic Church has always been seen as something grand, a towering symbol of tradition and authority. But what Pope Francis showed me is that faith isn't about perfection or power. It's about connection. It's about being real with yourself and with others." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room. "If anything, I hope this story encourages people to look at faith differently, not as something distant or unattainable, but as something deeply personal, something alive, something human." With that, the interview came to an end. Keanu stood up, shaking hands with the host and waving to the cheering audience. But as he walked off stage, the impact of his words lingered like a shadow, stretching far beyond the confines of the studio. Within minutes, clips from the interview began circulating online. Social media platforms lit up with reactions, opinions, and debates. Some praised Keanu for his courage in sharing such a profound story, while others criticized him for exposing private conversations. Religious scholars weighed in, discussing whether the Pope's admissions would strengthen or weaken the Church's influence. Meanwhile, ordinary people around the world found themselves reflecting on their own lives, inspired by the idea that even the most powerful figures are not immune to doubt. By the next morning, the story had gone viral. News outlets across the globe covered Keanu's revelation, dissecting every detail of his account. Headlines ranged from "Keanu Reeves shocks world with Pope Francis revelation" to "Pope Francis admits doubts," A new era for faith? The sheer volume of coverage was staggering, and the public response was equally intense. On Twitter, hashtags like Charles Pope Francis Truth and Keanu Reveals trended worldwide. Memes popped up, some humorous, others heartfelt, capturing the collective awe and confusion sparked by the announcement. Even late-night talk show hosts joked about it, though many acknowledged the deeper significance behind the story. For devout Catholics, the news hit especially hard. Many felt conflicted. On one hand, they admired Pope Francis for his honesty and vulnerability. His willingness to admit his struggles made him seem more relatable, more approachable. But on the other hand, some worried that revealing such intimate details might undermine his authority. Was it appropriate for a spiritual leader to share doubts so openly? Could this admission shake the faith of believers who looked to him for unwavering guidance? In small towns and big cities alike, parishioners gathered after Mass to discuss the revelation. In Rome, crowds flocked to St. Peter's Square, hoping for a glimpse of the Pope or perhaps a statement from the Vatican addressing Keanu's claims. Reporters camped outside the Vatican gates, microphones in hand, waiting for any sign of clarification. But the Vatican remained silent. For now. Meanwhile, Keanu himself became the center of attention in ways he hadn't anticipated. Fans flooded his social media accounts with messages of gratitude and support. Strangers sent letters to his fan club, thanking him for reminding them that everyone struggles, even those who seem larger than life. Yet, not all reactions were positive. Critics accused him of exploiting his friendship with the Pope for publicity, arguing that private conversations should remain private. Others dismissed the entire story as fabricated, claiming it was impossible for someone like Keanu to have such access to the pontiff. Despite the backlash, Keanu handled the scrutiny with grace. When asked about the controversy during a follow-up interview, he responded calmly. "This isn't about me," he said firmly. "It's about the message. If people focus on the messenger instead of the message, then we've missed the point entirely." His humility only fueled the growing admiration for him. To many, Keanu wasn't just an actor anymore. He was a conduit for change, using his platform to amplify voices that mattered. His decision to share the Pope's story wasn't driven by ego or ambition. It was rooted in a desire to foster understanding and empathy in a divided world. As days passed, the conversation shifted. What started as shock and skepticism gradually gave way to introspection. People began opening up about their own struggles, inspired by the courage shown by both Keanu and Pope Francis. Online forums buzzed with personal stories of doubt, fear, and resilience. One woman wrote about battling depression while raising her children alone. Another man shared how he doubted his ability to lead his company through tough times. A teenage girl posted about feeling lost and unsure of her future. Each story echoed the same theme. None of us are alone in our struggles. Religious leaders from different faiths joined the dialogue, praising Pope Francis for his transparency. A rabbi in New York tweeted, "Doubt is not the enemy of faith, it's part of it. Thank you, Pope Francis, for reminding us of that." An imam in London wrote an op-ed calling the Pope's admission a lesson in authenticity. Even atheists chimed in, acknowledging the universality of the message. "You don't have to believe in God to appreciate the humanity in this," one commenter wrote on Reddit. Amidst the whirlwind of reactions, Pope Francis himself finally broke his silence. During a Sunday address in St. Peter's Square, he addressed the rumors swirling around his meeting with Keanu. Standing before thousands of worshippers, he smiled warmly and spoke candid times. Amidst the whirlwind of reactions, Pope Francis himself finally broke his silence. During a Sunday address in St. Peter's Square, he addressed the rumors swirling around his meeting with Keanu. Standing before thousands of worshippers, he smiled warmly and spoke candidly, his voice carrying both strength and vulnerability. "My dear friends," he began, his tone gentle yet firm, "I have heard much about recent discussions concerning my private conversations. Let me be clear. I am not ashamed of what was shared." The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers echoing through the vast square. Pope Francis raised a hand to quiet them, his expression thoughtful as he continued. Faith is not a shield that protects us from doubt. It is a light that guides us through it. Yes, I have doubts. Yes, I feel unworthy at times, but these feelings do not weaken my faith, they deepen it. They remind me that I am human, just like all of you. His words resonated deeply, not only with those gathered in the square, but also with millions watching around the world. For many, this was the confirmation they needed. The Pope's acknowledgement validated Keanu's account and reinforced the message that vulnerability is not a flaw, it's a cornerstone of humanity. People listened intently, some nodding in agreement, others wiping away tears. Even skeptics who had questioned the authenticity of Keanu's story found themselves moved by the Pope's sincerity. As the address concluded, reporters scrambled to analyze every word the Pope had spoken. News outlets highlighted his remarks, emphasizing how his openness aligned with Keanu's earlier revelations. Social media buzzed once again, this time with renewed admiration for both men. Tweets praising their courage flooded timelines, while hashtags like "Dear Human Pope" and "Dear Faith Through Doubt" trended globally. It seemed that the initial shock of Keanu's announcement had given way to something far more profound, a collective realization that everyone, regardless of status or title, faces moments of uncertainty. Back in Los Angeles, Keanu watched the Pope's address on a small TV in his modest home. He sat quietly on a worn couch, his legs crossed and a cup of tea resting on the table beside him. As the Pope's words filled the room, a faint smile played on Keanu's lips. He felt a sense of relief, not because he'd been vindicated, but because the message he'd hoped to convey was being embraced. This wasn't about him. It was about fostering connection and understanding. And now, thanks to the Pope's public response, that message was reaching even more people. Later that day, Keanu received an unexpected call. It was one of his close friends, a filmmaker who had worked with him on several projects. "Keanu," the friend said, his voice tinged with excitement, "you realize what you've done, right? You've sparked a global movement." Keanu chuckled softly, leaning back on the couch. "I didn't mean to start anything," he replied. "I just wanted to share a story that mattered." "Well, it matters more than you think," the filmmaker continued. "People are talking, really talking about things they've kept hidden for years. Doubts, fears, insecurities. Your interview gave them permission to open up. That's powerful stuff." Keanu considered this for a moment, his gaze drifting to the window where sunlight streamed through the blinds. "If sharing that story helps people feel less alone, then I'm glad I did it," he said simply. "But let's not forget, it's not my story, it's Pope Francis's, and ultimately it's everyone's story." The filmmaker laughed. "Still so humble, huh? Don't sell yourself short, man. This is big, really big." Despite the growing attention, Keanu remained grounded. Over the next few days, he avoided interviews and public appearances, choosing instead to focus on his daily routine. He went for long walks, visited local bookstores, and spent time reflecting on the events that had unfolded. To him, none of this was about fame or recognition. It was about making a difference, however small, in a world that often felt disconnected. Meanwhile, the ripple effects of the revelation continued to spread. In schools, classrooms buzzed with discussions about vulnerability and leadership. Teachers encouraged students to write essays exploring the idea that even heroes face challenges. One high school senior wrote passionately about how hearing the Pope's struggles made her feel less alone in her own battles with anxiety. "If someone as important as the Pope can admit to feeling unsure," she wrote, "then maybe it's okay for me to feel that way too." In workplaces, colleagues began opening up about their struggles in ways they never had before. A manager in Chicago confessed to his team that he sometimes felt overwhelmed by the pressure to succeed, prompting others to share similar sentiments. What started as a single admission turned into a group conversation, breaking down barriers and fostering a sense of camaraderie. Employees left the meeting feeling lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. Even within religious communities, the impact was undeniable. Priests delivered sermons inspired by the Pope's words, encouraging congregants to embrace their doubts rather than suppress them. Rabbis, imams, and pastors echoed the sentiment, reminding their followers that spirituality is not about perfection, but about growth. One pastor in Texas told his congregation, "Doubt doesn't separate us from God, it draws us closer. It forces us to ask questions, to seek answers, to grow." As weeks passed, the story evolved from a shocking revelation into a catalyst for change. People weren't just talking about Keanu or the Pope anymore, they were talking about themselves. Online forums dedicated to mental health saw a surge in activity, with users sharing stories of resilience and hope. Support groups formed, bringing together individuals who had previously felt isolated in their struggles. Artistic expressions flourished, with musicians, poets, and painters drawing inspiration from the themes of vulnerability and authenticity. For Keanu, watching these developments unfold was both humbling and heartening. He hadn't set out to spark a movement, but he couldn't deny the beauty of what was happening. Humanity, in all its complexity, was finding common ground. Strangers were connecting over shared experiences, proving that no one is truly alone in their journey. One evening, as Keanu strolled along a quiet beach, he paused to watch the sunset. The sky blazed with hues of orange and pink, casting a golden glow over the water. He thought about the past few weeks, the whirlwind of emotions, the debates, the connections forged, and felt a deep sense of gratitude. This moment, he realized, was bigger than any movie premiere or award ceremony. It was proof that stories have power, that words can heal, and that even the simplest acts of honesty can create waves of change. Little did he know, this was only the beginning. The conversations he had ignited would continue to grow, touching lives in ways he could never have imagined. And though he preferred to stay out of the spotlight, Keanu knew one thing for certain. When given the chance to make a difference, he would always choose to speak up, for the truth, for humanity, and for the belief that we're all in this together. As the weeks turned into months, the impact of Keanu Reeves's revelation continued to ripple across the globe. What had started as a single interview in a Los Angeles studio had evolved into something far greater, a movement that transcended borders, cultures, and beliefs. People from all walks of life were finding solace in the idea that vulnerability wasn't a weakness, but a shared human experience. Conversations once considered taboo were now happening openly, breaking down walls of shame and isolation. In small towns and bustling cities, communities came together to host events centered around the themes of authenticity and connection. Book clubs added titles about resilience and self-discovery to their reading lists. Schools introduced programs encouraging students to express their emotions through art, writing, or music. Even workplaces began prioritizing mental health, offering workshops on stress management and emotional well-being. It seemed as though every corner of society was touched by the shift, and at the heart of it all was the simple yet profound message: no one is alone in their struggles. Keanu, for his part, remained largely out of the public eye. He declined invitations to speak at conferences and avoided media appearances, choosing instead to let the story unfold organically. Yet his influence lingered everywhere. His name became synonymous with humility and courage, qualities people admired not just in celebrities but in themselves. Fans often stopped him during his daily walks to thank him, not for his films but for sharing a truth that had changed their perspective. Each time, Keanu responded with the same quiet grace, reminding them that the credit belonged not to him, but to Pope Francis and the universal lessons they had both highlighted. Meanwhile, Pope Francis continued to embrace the spirit of openness he had sparked. In interviews and addresses, he spoke candidly about his own journey, how he too had faced moments of doubt and fear throughout his life. "I am not perfect," he said during one such address. "But perfection is not what God asks of us. He asks for honesty, for hearts willing to seek, to question, and to grow." These words resonated deeply, especially among younger generations who craved authenticity in an age dominated by curated social media personas and unrealistic expectations. The bond between Keanu and the Pope grew stronger as well. Though separated by thousands of miles and vastly different lives, the two men maintained a quiet friendship, built on mutual respect and purpose. They exchanged letters occasionally, discussing everything from global issues to personal reflections. In one letter, Pope Francis wrote, "Your willingness to share our conversation has reminded me why I chose this path, to serve not as a distant figure but as a fellow traveler on the road of life." Keanu kept the letter folded neatly in a drawer, pulling it out whenever he needed a reminder of why he had chosen to speak up. While the world celebrated the positive changes brought about by the revelation, not everyone viewed it favorably. Critics argued that exposing private conversations, even with good intentions, undermined the sanctity of personal relationships. Some within the Catholic Church expressed concern that the Pope's admissions might weaken its authority, particularly among conservative factions resistant to change. Others accused Keanu of overstepping boundaries, claiming that his actions blurred the line between celebrity influence and spiritual guidance. Despite these criticisms, the overwhelming response was one of gratitude and admiration. Religious leaders from various faiths praised Pope Francis for modeling humility and transparency. Atheists and agnostics, too, found value in the message, acknowledging that the struggle to find meaning was a universal experience regardless of belief systems. Even skeptics softened their stance, recognizing the tangible benefits of fostering empathy and understanding in a divided world. One of the most unexpected outcomes of the revelation was the way it bridged gaps between people of differing backgrounds. In New York City, a group of interfaith leaders organized a panel discussion titled, "Doubt and Faith: A Shared Journey." The event drew hundreds of attendees, including Christians, Jews, Muslims, Buddhists, and non-believers alike. Panelists shared stories of their own crises of faith, emphasizing that questions and uncertainties were not barriers to spirituality, but integral parts of it. Audience members left the event inspired, vowing to approach others with more compassion and less judgment. Similar gatherings took place worldwide, each one reinforcing the idea that vulnerability could be a unifying force. In Mumbai, a young woman named Priya attended a workshop focused on overcoming self-doubt. She had always felt inadequate compared to her successful siblings, but hearing others share their insecurities helped her realize she wasn't alone. For the first time, she later wrote in an online forum, "I feel like it's okay to not have everything figured out. That's freeing." Back in Hollywood, Keanu noticed subtle shifts in how people approached storytelling. Filmmakers began crafting narratives that explored characters' inner battles rather than glorifying outward achievements. Scripts emphasized themes of resilience, forgiveness, and growth, reflecting the cultural shift toward embracing imperfection. Even blockbuster movies started incorporating moments of raw humanity, proving that audiences craved authenticity as much as entertainment. Keanu himself returned to work, taking on projects that aligned with his newfound mission. He starred in a film about a man grappling with grief and guilt after losing his family in an accident. The role required him to delve deep into emotions he rarely showcased publicly, and critics hailed his performance as one of his most powerful yet. Audiences connected with the character's journey, seeing parallels between his struggles and their own. For Keanu, the project was more than just another acting job. It was an opportunity to continue spreading the message of hope and healing. The year drew to a close. Magazines and news outlets reflected on the events that had defined it. Time magazine named Keanu Reeves and Pope Francis Joint Persons of the Year, citing their roles in sparking a global conversation about vulnerability and humanity. The accompanying article highlighted how their actions had inspired millions to confront their fears and connect with others on a deeper level. In a world increasingly divided by politics, religion, and ideology, the piece concluded, these two figures reminded us of what truly matters: our shared humanity. For Keanu, the recognition was bittersweet. While he appreciated the acknowledgement, he knew the real heroes were the everyday people brave enough to open up about their struggles. He accepted the honor quietly, using the platform to encourage others to keep sharing their stories. "This isn't about me," he said during a rare acceptance speech. "It's about all of you, the ones who are making the world kinder, braver, and more compassionate every day." By the time winter arrived, The initial frenzy surrounding the revelation had settled into a steady hum of progress. People weren't just talking anymore, they were acting. Support networks expanded, resources for mental health became more accessible, and communities grew closer. The seeds planted by Keanu and Pope Francis had taken root, blossoming into something beautiful and enduring. As Keanu sat by the fireplace in his cozy home on Christmas Eve, he reflected on the past year. Outside, snowflakes drifted lazily to the ground, blanketing the world in a serene stillness. He thought about the countless lives touched by the story he had shared, not because of anything special he had done, but because of the timeless truth it carried. Vulnerability wasn't a flaw, it was a bridge connecting hearts. With a contented sigh, Keanu picked up a book and settled into his chair. The world outside may have been cold, but inside, he felt warmth, a quiet confidence that humanity was moving in the right direction. And though he preferred to stay behind the scenes, he knew one thing for certain. When given the chance to shine a light on hope, he would always choose to do so. After all, it was in those moments of connection that life found its true meaning. As the new year dawned, the world seemed quieter, calmer, as if the storm of revelations and conversations had settled into a gentle rhythm. The changes sparked by Keanu Reeves's interview weren't loud or flashy anymore. They were subtle, woven into the fabric of daily life. People carried on with their routines, but something was different. Conversations were deeper. Connections felt more genuine. Strangers smiled at each other on the street, not out of politeness, but because they shared an unspoken understanding. We're all in this together. Keanu noticed these small shifts wherever he went. At coffee shops, he overheard people talking openly about their fears and dreams. On social media, posts once filled with envy-inducing perfection were replaced by raw, honest reflections. Even in Hollywood, where image often mattered more than substance, there was a noticeable shift toward authenticity. Actors spoke candidly about their struggles with mental health. Directors focused on stories that celebrated imperfection, and audiences responded with overwhelming support. It was as if the world had collectively decided to lower its guard, to stop pretending everything was okay when it wasn't. For Keanu, this transformation was both heartwarming and humbling. He never sought recognition for sharing Pope Francis's story, but seeing how it had touched so many lives filled him with gratitude. Yet, he remained grounded, refusing to let the praise go to his head. To him, the real heroes were the everyday, people who had embraced vulnerability, not just in words but in actions. They were the ones making the world better, one kind gesture at a time. In Rome, Pope Francis continued to lead with humility and compassion. His sermons grew more personal, focusing less on doctrine and more on the human experience. "We are called to love," he told crowds gathered in St. Peter's Square one sunny afternoon. "And love cannot exist without honesty. If we cannot be honest with ourselves, how can we hope to connect with others?" These words resonated deeply, especially among younger generations hungry for guidance in navigating life's complexities. The bond between Keanu and the Pope remained strong, though they communicated mostly through letters. In one exchange, Keanu wrote about how the movement had inspired him to revisit his own journey. "I've spent so much of my life trying to understand pain, the loss of loved ones, the weight of expectations," he confessed. "But now I see that pain doesn't have to define us. It can teach us, guide us, even bring us closer to others." Pope Francis replied warmly, encouraging Keanu to keep sharing his experiences. "You have a gift," the Pope wrote. "Not just as an actor, but as a storyteller. Stories have the power to heal wounds we didn't know existed. Keep telling them, my friend. The world needs voices like yours." Inspired by the Pope's words, Keanu began working on a passion project, a documentary exploring the theme of resilience. He traveled to remote villages, bustling cities, and war-torn regions, capturing stories of ordinary people overcoming extraordinary challenges. From a single mother raising her children in poverty to a refugee rebuilding his life after fleeing violence, each story highlighted the strength found in vulnerability. The film premiered at a prestigious festival, earning standing ovations and critical acclaim. Critics called it a masterpiece of humanity, while viewers described it as life-changing. But Keanu didn't stop there. He used the proceeds from the documentary to fund initiatives supporting mental health awareness and community-building programs. Schools adopted curriculums designed to foster emotional intelligence, workplaces implemented policies promoting work-life balance, and neighborhoods organized events to strengthen ties among residents. Slowly but surely, the culture shifted, from one of competition and judgment to one of empathy and collaboration. Back in Los Angeles, Keanu's quiet acts of kindness became legendary. He visited hospitals, spending hours chatting with patients and listening to their stories. He surprised struggling families with groceries and rent payments, always insisting on remaining anonymous. When fans approached him in public, he greeted them with warmth, asking about their lives rather than talking about his own. To those who knew him, it was clear that the revelation had changed him too, not in dramatic ways, but in subtle, profound ones. He carried himself with even greater humility, viewing every interaction as an opportunity to make someone's day brighter. Meanwhile, the ripple effects of the movement reached places no one could have predicted. In conflict zones, peace talks gained momentum as leaders acknowledged their shared humanity. In prisons, inmates participated in workshops aimed at fostering self-reflection and forgiveness. Even in politics, divisive rhetoric gave way to calls for unity and cooperation. While the problems facing the world hadn't disappeared, the collective willingness to confront them with honesty and compassion made solutions seem possible. One evening, as Keanu strolled along a beach at sunset, he paused to watch the waves crash against the shore. The horizon glowed with hues of orange and pink, painting the sky with a sense of calm. He thought about everything that had happened since that fateful interview, the lives touched, the barriers broken, the connections forged. It wasn't perfect, of course. There were still moments of doubt, fear, and uncertainty. But progress wasn't about erasing those feelings. It was about learning to live alongside them. A young boy playing nearby caught Keanu's eye. The child laughed as he chased seagulls, his joy infectious. Keanu smiled, reminded of the simplicity of happiness. Life wasn't about achieving some grand ideal. It was about finding beauty in the little things, the laughter of a child, the warmth of the sun, the kindness of strangers. As darkness fell, Keanu headed home, his mind filled with thoughts of gratitude. He reflected on the unlikely friendship he'd formed with Pope Francis, the courage it took to share such a personal story, and the countless lives transformed by a message of vulnerability and connection. None of it had been planned, yet it had unfolded in ways he could never have imagined. That night, as he sat by the fire sipping tea, Keanu picked up a pen and began writing. Not for fame or recognition, but because he believed in the power of storytelling. His words flowed effortlessly, capturing the essence of what he'd learned, that life is messy, unpredictable, and beautiful, that everyone struggles but no one struggles alone, and that sometimes the smallest acts of honesty can create the biggest waves of change. When he finished writing, Keanu set the notebook aside and leaned back in his chair, letting the crackling fire fill the silence. Outside, the stars twinkled brightly, their light stretching across the vast expanse of the night sky. For Keanu, it was a reminder that even in the darkest moments there is always light, if only we're brave enough to seek it. The world would continue to evolve, facing challenges and triumphs alike. But one thing was certain: the seeds of vulnerability and empathy planted by Keanu and Pope Francis had taken root. They would grow, spreading their branches wide, offering shade and shelter to those in need. And though neither man sought credit for the change, their legacies would endure, not as symbols of fame or authority, but as reminders of what it means to be human. In the end, the story wasn't about Keanu or the Pope. It was about everyone who dared to open their hearts, to embrace their doubts, and to reach out to others with kindness. It was about a world slowly learning to see itself not as divided, but as united. And it was about the quiet, enduring belief that no matter how difficult the journey, We're all walking it together.